be supportive of me in terms of me, you know, nothing has ever been easy, but at least I've been engaged in doing, you know, I've been very supported by women.
Mm. And on that, can you say briefly the story behind Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz and like who she is, and then maybe we could show your short TED Talk your wonderful TED Talk.
Okay. So, you know, so this is the reason why my life passion has been on Sor Juana. Okay, I told you I went to 12 years of Catholic education.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my family is very Catholic. We went to Mass. And I'm going, why did I never learn about Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz? I learned about her in my first year at Harvard Divinity School, and it was in a liberation theology class, and I randomly picked her name. So it was just by chance that for some reason, I picked this nun's name. I never had heard about her, went to the library, and then kind of opened up her poetry. And I remember the first thing that I read was, she studies, she teaches, and thus she serves her faith, for how could God, who gave her reason, want her ignorant? And I was like going, I like her. And so that was an impetus for me to be like, to learn as much as I could about Sor Juana. Okay. And so 1648, 1651, she's a nun. She's from New Spain. She was, in her time, she was a Renaissance woman. She was a poet. She was a scientist. She was a writer. She did art and theater. And I'm going, at the time, I was like, why is it that so many people don't know about this woman? And I realized language was an issue because her writings were in Castilian Spanish. So for those of you who do know Spanish, Old Spanish from Spain is more difficult to understand. So for those of you who do know Spanish, you do have access to her writings. But then I also realized that people that, so if you don't have an education, you don't necessarily know about Sor Juana either. So I discovered too, like you brought in about hombres necios, that if individuals in Mexico's, if you have a sixth grade education or lower, most people know or are familiar with hombres necios, you know, foolish men. But it's a poem. It's not as difficult as El Sueño or La Respuesta, which are, you know, theological treaties, her theological treatise on God imagery and different things like that. So I just was like, I'm not Mexican. I'm half Peruvian, half Irish. But there was something in this woman that I was like, people need to know about her. People need to know that there was a woman. You know, this is another thing. To be feminist and to be a feminist and to be religious or faithful, they don't have to be an oxymoron. I can still believe in God. I can still believe in women and my faith. I mean, there doesn't have to there doesn't have to be a disconnect between those two things. So in Sor Juana, I found someone, a kindred spirit, that, you know what, you can also be a woman in the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I can be single. See, and even by saying that, it's like, I don't need to buy into the social norms for women, you know, that whether the church or our society. So in Sor Juana, I found a kindred spirit of a woman who knew her capacity, who was educated, who loved how to study, and, you know what, was also faith-filled. Mm. So I'm going, here I am, I was just talking with my cousin. For some reason, it seems better for me in some ways to be in a secular setting. When I say secular and non-religious, because in the Catholic Church, it's been hard for me sometimes to figure for some of my ideas to be as accepted, because I seem more progressive in the way that I understand things. But yeah, and this is so I've been studying about Sor Juana for 20 years, and I just think that especially individuals of Mexican descent should know about her.
Mhm.
And I've learned too as a teacher that people teach what they know. So my students have been fortunate that I've studied feminist theology. So I've studied about women on the margins in religion. But then I'm also interested in Latina women, also on the margins. So people teach what they know. So if you learn something more about Sor Juana, let other people know about her, because a lot of people don't know anything about her. But I am grateful. Yeah. I'm grateful that more people know about her now. In the last 40, 50 years, I feel like she's crossed the North American border with the United States. So
Absolutely. I'm going to show the TED Talk, the
okay.
4-minute TED Talk, and try to share my screen.
Okay.
Heavenly, do you want to put the YouTube video since I can't share?
Yeah, I think I'll have to pause the recording while we show the video, but then I'll keep recording once it's over.
Okay.
So is this the first time that everyone is seeing it besides Bianca and maybe the organizers?
No, I've seen that video before actually, but I've known about Sor Juana Inés all my life. I'm born and raised in Mexico. I did Mexican school until the 3rd grade, so it's something that's always been a part of my education. And I was actually really surprised when people in San Diego didn't really know about her.
Okay, so this is okay, so where we're in Mexico, you did learn about Sor Juana up until in your grammar
The 3rd
school.
grade. Yeah.
Okay, is that a given across schools?
Yeah, she's like it was said in the video. She's one of the figures in history from Mexico. She's one of the most important figures, and yeah, she's widely included in education in Mexico.
Okay, that makes me happy.
So yeah, she's like, her importance is like up there with like the founding fathers. So she's pretty important in Mexico.
And that's why I raised the question, is like why do people know more about Frida Kahlo than Sor Juana?
Yeah.
And I was like I think with Frida Kahlo, she has a different kind of story, powerful as well. I mean, tragic and powerful. But sometimes I'm like is it because some people don't, because she's a nun? I'm wondering if Frida Kahlo's story is more interesting sometimes to other people. Okay, but you, Anna, you have a deep sense of her profound contribution to Mexico.
Yeah, and I mean, I have learned about her since my education here in Mexico, but even when I came over to San Diego for middle and high school, I took several AP Spanish literature courses, and her poems and works were included in there. So I've studied Hombres Necios que Acusáis. I've read that a couple of times.
Okay, so then you could probably identify as a Sor Juanista scholar too.
Yeah, I've studied her throughout my education. Yeah.
So have other people learned about Sor Juana prior? Or?
Now that I think about it, I did take AP Spanish literature and I did learn about her poem Hombres Necios, but since we went through, I don't know, in other classes, we didn't really go through the story of her that in depth. We just talked about basically her poem and its historical context, but not her individually. And so learning about her story individually made her poem make much more sense.
much more powerful.
Much more powerful too.
Because it people teach what they know, and a lot of people don't know about her story. So that's why, like, in my book, okay, so Octavio Paz's book, oh my gosh, which was a seminal text for me, and I should have, it's like 500 pages. Octavio Paz, he wrote a book on Sor Juana. He was at Harvard in the late 80s, but it's like 500 pages. So that, his book was my Bible, Octavio Paz's book. Okay. But the reality is that, are most people going to pick up a 500-page book on a nun from the 17th century to read? Are most people going to do that? Okay. So I have my book on Sor Juana, and I'm very happy about it, that it's 100 pages. And I'm happy that it's not in it's not in, I don't use jargon. It's easy to read for individuals. So Octavio Paz, he did a superb job, even though he was a little machistic as well. He did a superb job giving a bigger socioeconomic political landscape for Sor Juana's work. But one of the questions is what is distinctive about my book is that what I've discovered is that most of the research on Sor Juana focuses on her relationship with men, because in her historical moment, she was on par, like you said, Anna, with the founding fathers. So people engage her in conversation with other men. You know, the issue that she had with that archbishop, I'm like, that was significant. You had a nun and an archbishop. Okay, so, and she wrote a theological treatise that was critiqued another priest or bishop or another priest. So essentially in my book, what I did was I reshifted the narrative to focus on Sor Juana's relationship with women. So I was interested in the origins of her feminist perspective. And the reality is that all of us, for better or for worse, whether we like it or not, are a reflection of our families. We may choose to make, so I was like my instinct is her feminist bent went back to her youth. So at Harvard Divinity School, I learned there was a scholar there, Elizabeth Schuster-Fiorenza, and she taught us how to do a feminist historical reconstruction. So looking at history, we know that history has predominantly been his story. So we say her story. So I'm going to re-look at Sor Juana's life and text, but from the perspective of women. And in that process, I found out a lot. Okay, because Sor Juana's mother, she was single. She never married. Okay. See, did you learn about Sor Juana's family or anything, Anna? In classes? Probably not, right?
No, not that side, but I mean, they would teach that mostly in that society, it was a patriarchal society, and that was distinct about her. That she grew up in a matriarchal house. But yeah, not really.
Okay. So you know what? So in terms of my question about the origins of her feminism, I realized, okay, so Sor Juana, she grew up surrounded by women. Her mother was single. She had 5 kids. She had 2 partners. She chose not to marry. But something that I think was interesting about this is that Sor Juana's mother, I think it was very much aware that if she did marry, that all of the assets for the family would go under the man. I cannot prove it first. I cannot prove it, but I hypothesize that the reason why that her mom did not marry is because in that counter-Reformation intense Catholic world in Mexico, if you did marry, all of the woman's assets went under the man. Okay, something important about Sor Juana's mother is that of the 11 kids in Doña Isabel Ramirez's family, her Doña Isabel, so Sor Juana's mom, was the one chosen after her father's death to take over the 2 haciendas that belonged to the Ramirez de Santillana kinship. So they made a choice. There was an intentional choice given to Sor Juana's mother. So even though Sor Juana's mother could not read or write, they knew she could manage finances. They knew she was equipped to be a hacienda owner. Now, and in that spirit, like Sor Juana's mother Sor Juana is a reflection of her mother. I would argue because she was a strong spirited woman. So I can sense that at their dinner table, her mom, they may have said, oh, the Catholic Church says this or the Catholic Church says that, but I'm not necessarily, her mom didn't buy into all of these formal rules or standards for women. So, okay, so I looked at her relationship with women. So she grew up around women. Then she would go into Mexico City and she would end up being in the viceroyal court with other women, the Vireinas. She was invited into that space. And then she would, in the third stage of her life, she would be around another group of women who are nuns. Now there's Alicia Gaspar de Alba argues that, she believes that Sor Juana was lesbian, which is, I don't agree necessarily with her. I mean, if she was, it's fine. But my thought is Sor Juana grew up, she was more comfortable around women. She grew up around women. But then I'm realizing, learning her story, it was the women in her life that actually she could count on. Because her, the father that gave birth to her denied that she was his child, giving her a stain on her sense of virtue in her world. Then you had her 2 sisters, her two full sisters were abandoned by men from Spain. They remarried in Mexico. But so Sor Juana was very much aware that women's relationships with men, that men weren't necessarily always there for women. I think that's, so the book narrates her story looking at her relationship with women versus the majority of scholarship looks at her relationship with men. So, and it's a narrative. When I'm the next thing I'm working on right now is to have it translated into Spanish. That's what I want to do. Now with the TED Ed, that project took 1.5 years from beginning to end. But it was worth it. It was worth that time for 4.5 minutes, because now it has 3,800,000 views. For those of you who don't know, for people who don't know about Sor Juana, to learn about her in 4.5 minutes, so I am a teacher scholar, but I am an educator, and you know, my colleagues aren't doing the same kind of work that I'm doing. Like that TED Ed meant a lot to me because Sor Juana is out there. I'm actually involved in, I'm co-chair for this Inca Christ Child Mass in Los Angeles to reclaim this Inca Christ Child from Peru that whose story has been unknown. So I guess I'm like Sor Juana in the sense that I think my faith and my feminism go together. If that's something, and I don't think there necessarily needs to be a schism between that. I think that some people have a schism with it, but my faith and my feminism, or my Latina feminism, go together. You had a question about Latina feminism. Should I comment on that?
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I was thinking about that. Okay, so everyone has a different ideological perspective, influenced by religion, culture, and all these different variables. So I'm a Latina feminist in the sense that my theology, my ideologies, my religiosity are informed by Latino culture. Okay, so that's why they'll say I'm an Asian feminist, you know, or I'm a Native American feminist. But so the work that I do as a Latina, I raise different questions than my other feminist sisters because of the culture that I grew up in. So a significant, like I did an article on Our Lady of Guadalupe, but I reframed her as an ecological intercessor. Okay, so I don't know. Do you know what that intercessor is for those of you who are Catholic or?
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me, Bianca, do you know what I'm talking about? An intercessor?
Do you mean intercessor in the La Virgen de Guadalupe is in contact with God or has communication with God? So
Yes.
if you, in a sense, talk to her or pray to her, that it'll go to God.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the thing is that normally in Catholic doctrine, it's Jesus is the sole intercessor to God. Okay. So in my essay on Our Lady of Guadalupe, I talk about Mary as an ecological intercessor. Okay. The reality is that we are dealing with climate change right now. This is an important issue in terms of the environment. But I think of Mary as a cosmic mother. She is surrounded by stars, and she's on the moon, and she's holding the sun. So my interpretation of Guadalupe as an ecological intercessor comes from my understanding of Latino culture, respect for Our Lady of Guadalupe, in conversation with what's going on at this moment in our history. So someone who's an Asian feminist theologian is not going to have that same worldview. See, that's what I was thinking too, is that I'm an article that I just finished and I'm revising for publication is about the focus is Latinx environmental resistors in the United States and in the Americas. What I'm realizing is that the Latino community has a different ideological framework in terms of our relationship with neighbor and the natural world. Okay, so the reality is that we live in a U.S. system, an ideological framework where there is more self-oriented, more capitalistic. They think more about ourselves. So you can disagree with me, but those of you who are part of Latino culture, there's more of a sense of communal, of a communal sense of how you interact with one another. I mean, do you agree with me,
Absolutely.
Bianca, or no?
Yes, I do agree. I spent some time in Mexico just for vacation with family, and I definitely felt more welcomed, and people are more willing to embrace this community atmosphere, whereas the US is more individuals,
Yes.
for the most part, individual centered.
Okay. So the work I'm doing right now is reframing how Mexican culture and Latin American culture is perceived. In the United States, Mexicans are perceived very negatively, okay, by our current administration. So an article I did, I'll tell you, see, this is what I do. So I did an article on Sor Juana as a border crosser. What I did was I compared her to Trump, and I looked at how, like, Sor Juana valued knowledge and education and thus facts. Okay. Also, Sor Juana was comfortable having conversations or crossing boundaries. So what I'm saying is that there's something in Mexican culture that values relationality, or values, what is it, facts. You know, it just not just opinions, but educated opinions. So this Latinx resistors essay I'm finishing, what I'm doing is reframing it. Mexico was actually with Tenochtitlan, it was the first ecological city in the Americas. Okay, so in a time of our climate challenges, we actually can look to Mexico for some resources about how to address the climate challenge. So I think that it's something that I've picked up from my education is by virtue of being able to write and analyze, I can rewrite history so that it most reflects or positively reframes Hispanic Latino contributions. So, and I think that we need that, a different ideological framework if we're going to try to engage the issues of the climate. How many of you probably didn't hear, but Pope Francis published an encyclical yesterday? Did you hear about Pope Francis's encyclical?
No, I have not. I didn't see.
So what's interesting is he wrote it in Spanish.
Oh, see.
It's the first encyclical written in Spanish. I need to say that by virtue of him doing that, he's showing his respect of Latin American culture. I'll say to you, when I was doing my PhD, you have to have certain tests in different languages, and they would not count Spanish as one of them. So my mentor had to advocate that I could do French and Spanish versus French and German. So I'm just saying that the Spanish culture needs to be more affirmed as a valid culture contributing civilization. Sor Juana picked it up. Like in her literature, she would make comparisons between Mesoamerican pyramids and the Western Greco-Roman Egyptian pyramids. she picked it up that why is it that Western civilization is more valued and not her culture. So I think that I'm picking that up from her as like going, you hear all these negative things about Mexicans, or you hear they're just undermining indigenous populations in Latin America, that like in her time, we don't say barbarians now. They're not civilized, or they're not but in actuality, I believe the wisdom to the challenges of our time are in a Latino ideology, and like within our ideological framework, the way that we understand our relationship with each other and the world. And Pope Francis is Latin American.
Yes, he is.
So he is a very distinct, he comes from that worldview, a Latin American worldview, where and he was also a chemist. He has a PhD, I want to say, in chemistry. So he understands climate change. But so he published an encyclical to say that we need to be brothers and sisters and take care of not only the earth, but also each other. So I guess the work that I've been doing, I recognize that it's my worldview, or my Latino culture influences the way that I think about questions or formulate questions. And that, I don't know, for me, it was inspiring learning about Sor Juana and telling other people about her, because then you realize you have a role model. And many people don't have, they don't have those, especially women, they don't have role models to kind of empower them that way. Do you have comments or questions for me, or do you want to ask me another question? What are you thinking, Jana? I'm like,
Yeah.
or I don't know. You want to, yeah, I mean, because are you Filipino, or are you Asian?
I am Filipino.
Okay.
I've never learned about this, or really a lot of history in Mexico, just in my education, just in California, where I grew up. So being able to learn about this, even that, like, just that TED Talk video was really helpful and insightful. And like when it was playing, I was like looking up some more stuff on the side too. And so seeing how that has impacted you in your life has been really, really cool to learn about.
She's changed my life. She radically changed my life. And everyone's like, I've been studying her for 30 years. I was your age when I first learned about her. So it's like been, so right now I want, okay. So in terms of the TED-Ed, they can tell me who predominantly has watched it, and it's mostly in Europe. Okay. And so I asked them, because I want it in Spanish.
Mhm.
So they're working to do the subtitles in Spanish, because I'm like, that's my target audience, right? Being able to have, can you imagine if individuals throughout Latin America saw that? That would be really, I mean, it would put her on fire, in terms of being known, But Anna, I'm glad that in your experience, people, do have a sense of Sor Juana throughout schools in Mexico.
Yeah, I
'Cause I
mean,
wasn't sure about that.
least in Mexico. Yeah, at least in Mexico. She's like I said, she's pretty much in every history book. Like, I remember in school, we always had a chapter on her. Like, she is a part of the education. And I mean, I'm not sure for the rest of South American, Central American countries. But I mean, she is pretty prevalent in as a figure in Mexican culture and history. I mean, there's I've seen several documentaries. They even came out with a mini series, like a drama
Yeah.
series from Telemundo. But I mean, yeah, at least on my end here in Tijuana, I'm from Tijuana. She's pretty popular. She's somebody that everybody that was born and went to school here, at least everybody knows about her.
So, but you were saying something about less people knew about her in San Diego. Is that what you were saying? Is that what?
At least with I mean, I went to middle and high school in Chula Vista,
Okay.
which in that area there's a lot of Mexican, and it's funny because in that area it's a lot more Mexicans that cross the border on a daily basis, like I did.
Okay.
It's not necessarily Mexican Americans; it's more Mexicans that barely come to live in the States. So obviously, those individuals already have information on her, but at least with my university education so far, I don't think I've met anybody that actually knows about her. Um, so I mean, it depends on the demographics of the location, obviously. But yeah, in my experience, the farther you get from the border, the less information there is on her.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's why it's really important to have things in English. So it's not only, like you said, geographically, like being like if you're in Mexico, of course you're going to probably be more exposed to Sor Juana. But then, so there's a Spanish part of it, but then if so, I guess I think you're right there about the geographics and knowing language.
Yeah, for me, I grew up in the outskirts of LA. I grew up in San Bernardino, California, and it was predominantly Latino American, Mexican American, African American population. And I did grow up Catholic, and I did not have an education on the history or her in general. I never knew about her until I took that class my junior year of high school in the AP Spanish literature class. And for me, learning about her, and also again in Dr. Rodriguez's class, it really made me understand more and like be inspired. And I wish that I knew her before and had more context of her when I was younger and when I was growing up, and I felt like I didn't have a Latina role model. Especially me, I did grow up in a predominantly Latino area, but I did move out of that area and moved to a more predominantly white area, and that transition was really difficult for me. And she was basically, like you said, like an amazing role model for that.
You know what? That's why I was like that's why I was like, people need to know about her. So Bianca, are your parents from Mexico? Or are they
Yes.
from here? Because I think another part of it, Anna, is whether you're Mexican American. Like my students at Cal State LA, I asked them. A lot of them don't know about her. More of them know now. But I say, ask your parents, those who grew up in Mexico, what they know about Sor Juana. And then they find out, oh my God, they know something about Sor Juana, but it just never gets, what is it? Communicated.
Mm-hmm.
Communicated.
Yeah,
So
my dad grew up in Mexico, and he immigrated when he was 18. And my mom came when she was really young, when she was around 3 or 4 months of age. So she was born in Mexico also, but she got more of the American culture versus my dad was more of the Mexican culture. So I do kind of consider myself Mexican American, but I am Mexican. But definitely my dad, I haven't asked him too much about it, but I'm pretty sure like he knows.
I want you to ask him, and I want to know what he says.
Yeah, I will ask him.
I want you to know. So, yeah, I've been studying her for 30 years. So, and I think that is for minimally for women of Mexican descent, women, and then everybody need to know about her. And in the Catholic Church, there's a title. They're in the Catholic Church to honor certain women. They're given doctors, the title of doctor. Now, I want Sor Juana to have that title because we have 4 women. Catherine of Siena, so Catherine of Siena, Italy. We have Hildegard of Bingen, Germany. Teresa of Avila from France. Oh no, Teresa Lisieux from France. Teresa of Avila from Spain. I'm like, it should be, the 5th one should be Sor Juana. And it would bring, what is it, the West, it would bring the East and the West together by having Sor Juana. So I believe there is a movement. There are people who want her to be a saint. Anna, I don't know if you know, but I think she's more of a doctor. Women who are given the title of doctors, it means that they have contributed as reformers in the church. And Sor Juana was a reformer in the church. The challenge, though, is that she was critiquing sexism. So I've joked or said that in order for them to accept her as a doctor, they would need to, the church would also need to recognize that they had been sexist toward women in the church. It's okay. You know what, Hannah? Your head. You nodded your head. You're like, it makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. But I think that really could be. I don't know what the process for that looks like. Are you familiar with it? It seems like it would take a lot of that.
You know what? In 2006, I wrote a letter and I sent it to Pope John Paul II, and I got a letter back with 2 postcards of him, recognizing that they got the letter, but nothing happened. So I don't know. I need to get you younger people together and we do some kind of, I don't know, what is it? Hashtag Sor Juana, let her be doctor in the church. But I think I need to find out because she should really be a doctor in the church. She's not, I don't see her per se as a saint. No, she was a thinker. She was a doctor. She was a scholar. So, you know what, Lexi, what are you thinking? Because you haven't really commented. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I never knew about Sor Juana before literally right now. My parents, well, my mom was born in Mexico, but she moved here when she was 2, and my dad was born in San Diego, and we live in a suburb here in California, so predominantly white people. So yeah, it's an interesting perspective to listen about because I always want to learn more about my culture and everything.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, I think that's I don't know if you've heard about in the news about ethnic studies now that we're going to have, right? You've heard about the CSUs are now going to have an ethnic studies requirement. So I'm part of that. The CSU. So this is wonderful for I'm realizing the work that I do, I'm interested in creating culturally sensitized curriculum. You know, the curriculum is normally from a per certain historical Western perspective, and I'm interested in creating counter narratives that also talk about culture but reframing who are the protagonists. That's why for me, knowing about Tenochtitlan prior to the conquest of the Spanish, it was the first ecological city in the Americas. It was so, you
Speaking
know,
of
yeah.
history, growing up in California and basically like how California used to be a part of Mexico, and there is a lot of Latin culture
Yeah.
into California. And I always expected that I would have at least minimal education on that during school and in my grade school. And I got zero education whatsoever on Latin history in general, or Mexican history, or Latino history in general. And to me, I didn't really learn about that until I left middle school, grade school, a little bit in high school, but I learned a lot more in college about it. And I think that I was almost cheated or robbed of that education about my own culture growing up. And that's something that's definitely missing in California and in other states as well.
You know what? I think that that's why this ethnic studies requirement is important. But you're right that individuals, we learn history that is the dominant narrative. So that's why as an educator, I'm like, people teach what they know. So my professors taught me what they knew. So I was reading Shakespeare or reading, I don't know, different books that were more white. But then I was fortunate to get a master's in feminist theology where I was exposed to more writings by women. Or at Mount St. Mary's, I was exposed to more writings by women. That's why in my classes, I can integrate that. But you know what? I like the way you said that, Bianca, that it's like you being robbed of your right to know about who your culture is and what contributions have had. So I guess that's what I've been trying to do too, is to reframe some of these historical narratives in terms of what is the contributions of Mexicans in the Americas. So can we reframe it? So actually, Sor Juana is a role model for us. In the essay, I use the term frontera. Because Trump's constantly talking about the U.S. border, but the parallel term is la frontera, right? But frontera is different from border. You know, do you know, is it heavenly? Do you know Spanish? Are you fluent in Spanish or no?
I'm not very fluent, no.
Okay, what is the distinction? Do you know, Lexi, between border and frontera? Or how would you define frontera?
Me? I'm
know?
not very fluent in Spanish either.
Okay. Anna?
So you want the distinction between frontera and border?
When you think of frontera, what are you thinking?
Well, I mean, being from Tijuana, it's the idea or the concept of a frontera is more of a city as a whole. It's more of a culture, a frontera culture, because it's even as somebody from Tijuana, having frontera culture includes things from across the border of San Diego, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So border is more like the literal division between countries. And frontera is more of a culture that's shared between the two sharing cities, that the only thing keeping them from being together is that wall or that border. And you can definitely see it on San Diego as well as Tijuana. I mean, I'm just using those as an example because that's how I have been experienced in my life.
Yeah.
But yeah, frontera is more of a culture. It's more of a defining for a city. And I mean, you see it across Mexico and the United States. I mean, you see it across Texas, Arizona. I have family in Arizona, and Sonora, and they have the exact same thing. It's a frontera culture. So, yeah.
So what I'm saying is that the way that Sor Juana understands, I say she's a first generation American. I coined her as a first generation American who understands borders, who understands the concept of border more as a frontera. You have this horizon where things come together, versus comparing it to Trump, where it is a literal border, a physical marker. So I'm saying that Sor Juana has a more inclusive understanding of what it means to be American, in contrast to our current presidency, who is more, focused on making distinctions between, physical distinctions between who was in and who was out. Yeah, so
never
that
experienced the frontera culture, so you wouldn't really understand the frontera culture.
You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Bianca. Yes. And the thing is, that's why that gives me chills what you just said. He's never experienced it. So what I'm saying is that, okay, so right now we have a president whose ideological framework or worldview is very much U.S. white capitalistic capital. It's not people, it's not nature, it's not anyone but yourself. And I'm saying Latino culture, inherent in the way that we understand our relationship with ourselves and to the natural world, is more communal. We think of people. We don't think of the way that we treat people is different. Now, the Pope in the same way. We have this Latin American Pope. He's advocating that we treat nature and people not as market commodities. So I just think that I'm realizing, especially in, so a month from now, yeah, we're going to be voting, right? It's really interesting how many, oh my gosh, I know you know it from your peers as well, probably, but there's so many different ideological perspectives. Everyone has different ideological perspectives, right? I mean, left, right, so I think that there's some wealth or wisdom that Latino culture, by virtue of our bodies being mestizo or blended, we have an acceptance of other cultures or people that are not just necessarily black or white. I don't know. So that's the way I try to think about it, is, but it'll be interesting, this election in a month, because there are so many different ideological frameworks. And I'm
Yeah.
more, yeah, I don't know. I'm progressive. I'm realizing you hear so many different, I don't know, people think so many different ideological frameworks.
Absolutely. And that's something that makes America unique, but also presents a variety of challenges. But on that note, we would love to honor other people's time so we can continue a conversation. But
Yeah.
the meeting has run over a little, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to say anything, Heavenly, or add
I
anything?
wanted to open it up if anybody had any like questions that they wanted to ask.
Mm.
Kind of open the floor. The last like maybe 10 minutes or so can be just if anybody has any questions. Or
Yeah, absolutely.
Christina?
Introduce myself real quick. I'm the alumni Mosaic board member. So I graduated in 2014 and I saw that you were having this event. So I wanted to chime in here and just say hello. And also introduce yourself if you ever need anyone to talk to. You can reach me at my email, which is Christina Marcial, the pointloma.edu. But I wanted to share that I recently went to Oaxaca to be a volunteer for a library English teacher. And it wasn't until I got there that I started seeing a lot of like books on Sor Juana Inés. And I had a friend of mine who's a teacher on literature, and she reached out to me. She's like, "What do you know about this?" I'm like, "Who?" She's like, "She's on the 200 bill peso." And I was like, and I like looked at my wallet. I was like, "She is on the 200 bill peso."
Mm-hmm.
And so this has been a really interesting workshop to hear more about her. While I was there, I did want to learn more about her, and this is like a great introductory into kind of exploring more about how I can, in context to what's going on now and how can I apply that to my life. So.
You know what? I'm glad. So you're a graduate of 2014.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So 6 years.
Okay.
Crazy.
Well, please, you know what? Do share the TED Ed with people. I'm being selfish, but I want to get to 5 million for November 19th. It went live November 19th, 2019, and we're at 3,800,000. But normally they say you get 1 million in a year. So I want to get to 5 million. So if you want to help me out, but I'm like going, I think people need to know about who this woman was. So, and I love it. Then my students leave at the end of the class. They have a Sor Juana attitude. And I'm like, yeah, they're not going to take it anymore because they know that Sor Juana didn't take it either. so,
Any other questions?
Yeah, any.
I think if no one has any questions, then I think that we.
Okay. Christina?
For sharing.
Okay.
What's your email?
Thank you so much for doing this, and I
Oh,
think
you're
we all
welcome.
learned so much today, and
Good.
I appreciate it a lot.
So let me just say I appreciate each one of you. There's a lot of work to do. And women are the worker bees. I really do. I mean, I'm doing work within, my predominant work is as a teacher in the school, but I'm also doing work within my faith community. I'm just like going, there's a lot of work to be done, and women do a lot of this work. Can we take a picture? Would it be okay if we took a picture? Okay, I'm going to try to do a screenshot. Or can you, see, someone else came up. Okay, let me try it. Okay, so let's see. Okay, let's see. Oh, wait a second, wait. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to try to do the screenshot. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's nice. Okay. You're okay if I put it on my Facebook page? They're like, we're okay.
That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll be sending over the recording too that we took of the
Okay. Okay. Yeah, no. but you give me hope. So just keep on doing what you're doing. And yeah, just know that we're not alone. Sor Juana was doing it too. So, okay.
All right. Thank you again.
Okay, take care. And Christina, I'm going to note your email address too.
Yeah, are you teaching at LMU?
I taught at LMU for a year, and then I teach at Cal State LA.
Oh, okay, because I'm in LA, so I used to work at Santa Monica College, and so when I left, I just came back. So now I'm like just kind of waiting it out and seeing what's gonna happen in terms of like employment opportunities, but hopefully staying in the LA area. But
Okay.
LMU is such a transfer school for Santa Monica College, so that's what I was like wondering if you were still there.
Okay. If I can be of help to either of you, they know my email, but it's just Teresa